Have you ever wondered how to stand firm in God when everything around you seems unfair? When words are twisted against you, when enemies rise up without reason, when even life itself seems suffocated by oppression, how can we react without losing faith? Psalm 17 invites us to delve into this very scenario, a sincere prayer by David, offered in the midst of adversity, but filled with absolute trust in the Lord. Psalm 17 is more than a cry for deliverance. It is a mirror of the human soul before the God who sees beyond appearances. David does not present himself as perfect, but as someone who seeks to live with integrity before God. He opens his heart with transparency and places himself before the righteous judge, recognizing that only the Lord can judge with equity and defend the innocent. This is the essence of a faith that is not based on masks, but on surrender. In this psalm, we also find the tension between our fragility and the greatness of divine justice. David shows that, no matter how much external struggles try to stifle hope, there is a safe refuge in God. Even when we are surrounded, we are not alone. Even when we are wronged, there is a God who knows every detail, every tear, every intention. He is the defender of those who trust in Him. In this video, we'll delve, verse by verse, into this sincere cry for justice and protection. We'll discover how David opens his heart before God, asking the Lord to examine his life, judge fairly, and keep him as the apple of his eye, and we'll see how these words still speak powerfully to our hearts today. Stay until the end, because in addition to a profound and transformative reflection, we'll pray a prayer together inspired by Psalm 17, a prayer that can renew your trust in God's care, strengthen your faith amidst your struggles, and reaffirm your hope in the Lord's victory.
Verse 1. Hear, O Lord, the righteous, give heed to my cry, give ear to my prayer, which comes not from deceitful lips.
David opens this psalm with an intense cry, asking God to hear his just cause. He speaks not of a superficial or merely repetitive prayer, but of a plea that springs from the sincerity of his heart. There were no disguises, masks, or manipulations in his words, only a vulnerable and honest spirit before the Creator. This beginning confronts us. How often are our prayers motivated by appearances, religious conventions, or personal interests, rather than a genuine desire to seek God's will? Here we learn that God is not impressed by beautiful words or rehearsed speeches, but by the truth that comes from within the soul. The Lord knows our hearts and knows when our intentions are pure or distorted. David was confident that his prayer was not tainted by falsehood, and this gave him the boldness to ask God to hear his cry. It is an invitation to examine our own prayers and ask, are we just talking, or are we truly pouring ourselves out before God with authenticity? Genuine prayer, like David's, arises from a heart that understands that only God can judge justly and answer faithfully. He did not address men, but the one who sees the invisible and discerns even the deepest intentions. This attitude teaches us that when we approach the Lord with complete transparency, we can have confidence that He not only listens, but also welcomes and responds in His perfect timing. To reflect, do my prayers reflect sincerity or mere formality? Have I hidden something from God, or am I presenting myself with transparency? Do I trust that God hears my innermost intentions?
Verse 2. Let my sentence go forth before thy face. Let thine eyes regard equity.
David begins this verse with an intense cry. He not only wants his situation to be seen, but he wants it to be your case is judged with pure justice, in divine standards. He recognizes that human judgments are flawed, often biased by emotions, interests, and prejudices, but he trusts that God's gaze penetrates the essence of every heart and situation. This is a call to remember that, even when we feel wronged by humankind, there is a perfect equity that surrounds and sustains us. By asking that God's eyes behold justice, David reveals an unshakable confidence in the Lord's justice. He does not seek revenge, nor does he manipulate words to impress. His request is transparent and honest, a total surrender to divine righteousness. This attitude challenges us to reflect on how we have presented our own causes to God, with sincerity or with pretensions. True justice only flourishes when the heart is clean and the soul is aligned with the Lord's truth. Trusting in God's equity is resting in a refuge that cannot be shaken. It is the certainty that, even in the midst of pain, injustice, or persecution, our lives are in the hands of the Creator, who sees everything clearly, without partiality. It is an invitation to surrender our disappointments, frustrations, and hurts into the Lord's hands, knowing that He judges perfectly and never fails to discern the truth. Divine equity is not just a concept, but a living promise for those who seek refuge in Him. To reflect, have I sought human approval more than God's? When wronged, do I trust God's judgment or try to resolve it myself? Do I recognize that God sees the full truth in every situation?
Verse 3. You have tested my heart. You have visited me in the night. You have examined me, but found nothing. I have purposed that my mouth should not transgress.
David recognizes that God has already searched his heart and found no falsehood. He commits to living with integrity, keeping his words consistent with his thoughts. God doesn't just look at outward actions. He examines hidden intentions, thoughts, and desires. This profound knowledge calls us to inner integrity and vigilance over our words. This verse teaches us that purity of heart must go hand in hand with careful speech. Good intentions are not enough. Our words must reflect our sincerity before God. To reflect, if God were to examine my heart right now, what would He find? Do my words reflect my intentions, or do they contradict me? Am I careful about the power of my words before others and God?
Verse 4. As for the works of men which you hate, remove them from me. I do not cling to their laws.
David expresses here his deep desire to total distancing from sin and injustice, not only on the external plane, but also in the moral and spiritual realm. He recognizes that, even in the midst of a society full of human norms and customs, not everything accepted by the world pleases God. This verse challenges us to reflect on what standards we follow. Do we seek human approval, or do we seek to live according to the Lord's eternal values? By asking God to remove from him the works he hates, David demonstrates a clear awareness that evil must not be merely avoided out of prudence or fear, but rejected with firmness and conviction. He understands that true fidelity to God requires discernment to recognize what corrupts and the courage to stay away from it. This stance requires constant vigilance, as sin is often subtle, disguised as convenience or social acceptance. The psalmist also states that does not stop at the laws of men, showing that his loyalty is primarily to God's standard of justice. He teaches us that integrity is not simply passive behavior, but an active choice not to conform to injustice, even when it is popular or rewarded. For David, the preservation of the soul and fidelity to God are more valuable than any momentary advantage or social approval. To reflect, have I actively avoided what displeases God? Do I allow unjust and corrupt standards to influence my decisions? Is my faithfulness greater than the social pressures around me?
Verse 5. I keep my integrity with the upright, and I join with those who follow after righteousness.
David highlights the vital importance of walking alongside people who reflect the character of God. He understands that integrity does not develop in isolation. We are shaped by the influences we allow into our lives. Being around righteous people strengthens one's faith, inspires right decisions, and keeps one's heart steadfast in the face of temptation. Choosing one's company is, therefore, a concrete expression of spiritual wisdom. This verse teaches us that proximity to the righteous acts as a shield against evil. The presence of those who seek to live according to divine principles creates an environment of mutual edification, encouraging us to persevere in righteousness even when the world pressures us to act otherwise. Integrity, here, is presented not only as a personal choice, but as a collective commitment to faith and values. Furthermore, David reminds us that spiritual influence is powerful, and continuous being around people of integrity challenges us to maintain consistency between faith and practice, to align thoughts, words, and actions with God's standards. The Christian life is not only about avoiding evil, but also about actively embracing good, and this often happens through association with those who live in light and righteousness. To reflect, do my relationships strengthen my faith or distance me from God? Do I seek closeness with righteous people to learn and grow spiritually? Do I have the discernment to choose companions who reflect God's values?
Verse 6. Search me, O Lord, and try me. Refine my heart. You are my strength.
David calls for a profound examination of his life, asking God to go beyond appearances and reveal what is hidden in his heart. He is not afraid to be confronted with his weaknesses, but seeks purification and complete alignment with divine will. This request demonstrates humility and courage, for recognizing the need for refinement implies allowing the Creator to shape every intention, thought, and inner desire. The psalmist also recognizes God as his fortress, the solid rock where he finds protection and support. True security, as he demonstrates, is not found in external circumstances, riches, or human influence, but in a relationship with the one who is unshakable and faithful. God not only protects but transforms, giving firmness to the heart in the face of life's adversities and trials. Refining the heart means allowing the Lord to remove everything that does not please Him, from feelings of pride to attitudes that can harm our integrity. This process is delicate and profound, as it shapes not only actions but the very essence of our being. Surrendering to this divine inspection requires complete trust, knowing that the Creator desires our well-being and spiritual maturity. To reflect, do I allow God to refine my heart and transform me? Do I recognize God as my strength at all times? Do I have the courage to be examined by Him without hiding anything?
Verse 7. Yet you are righteous, O Lord, and you love justice. The upright will see your face.
David confidently affirms God's perfect justice, recognizing that he not only observes but deeply values righteousness and integrity. This statement reveals the psalmist's steadfast faith. Even when circumstances seem unjust or the wicked temporarily prosper, he trusts that God acts according to His eternal justice, rewarding those who remain faithful and upright in heart. The verse also highlights that God's love for justice is not impersonal. He draws near to those who seek to live righteously. Those who choose the path of righteousness not only avoid evil but become recipients of divine presence and communion. Seeing the Lord's face symbolizes intimacy, trust, and protection, an experience of closeness that transforms the heart and renews hope amid life's trials. Seeking God's face is, therefore, more than a spiritual desire. It is a daily commitment to live according to the principles of justice and truth. The righteous maintain their integrity even when no one is watching, knowing that the greatest reward comes from the Lord, who loves what is right and true. It is in this commitment that one finds security, peace, and strength to face adversity. To reflect, do I live in a way that attracts God's presence? Do I understand that righteousness is recognized and valued by God? Do I seek intimacy with God more than human approval?
Verse 8. Keep me, O Lord, as the apple of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings.
David calls out to God for complete and delicate protection, comparing himself to the apple of his eye, something precious and extremely sensitive. This image reveals not only vulnerability but also absolute trust in the Creator's loving care. He recognizes that true security lies not in human walls, fortifications, or one's own strategies, but in the constant vigilance of God, who observes every detail of our lives with attention and zeal. The psalmist also evokes the metaphor of God's wings, a representation of shelter, comfort, and protection amid life's storms and attacks. Under the shadow of these wings, we find refuge not only physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. It is a place where our weaknesses, fears, and insecurities are embraced, and where we can rest confidently in the Lord's faithfulness. This verse reminds us that God not only protects, but also surrounds, supports, and sustains. When we feel threatened, persecuted, or overwhelmed by life's challenges, He offers us a safe haven that transcends any human security. Trusting in this protection is surrendering completely, allowing God to guide our steps and keep us steadfast, even in the face of adversity. To reflect, do I trust in God's loving protection in my life? Do I feel safe in the Lord's hands, even in the face of threats? Do I turn to God as my daily shelter or only in crises?
Verse 9. Protect me from the wicked who persecute me. Deliver me from those who oppress me.
In this verse, David expresses his total dependence on God in the face of those who oppose him. He recognizes that human strength is limited and that true deliverance comes only through divine intervention. The psalmist not only seeks protection but also cries out for complete deliverance, demonstrating unshakable faith in God's ability to overcome any injustice or threat that may arise in his life. This verse challenges us to reflect on where we seek refuge in times of conflict. How often do we try to face enemies with our own strength, forgetting that God is sovereign over all situations? Trusting in divine protection means surrendering every adversity to the Lord, knowing that He sees beyond appearances and judges with perfect justice. Furthermore, David's prayer reminds us that God is a constant defender of those who love Him. He doesn't just passively observe attacks, but acts effectively, preserving the life, integrity, and purpose of those who place their trust in Him. By crying out for protection, we are reaffirming our faith in the Lord's faithfulness and unwavering care. To reflect, do I trust God even when I face persecution or injustice? Have I sought deliverance or tried to solve everything on my own? Do I recognize God's sovereignty over my enemies?
Verse 10. They grow weak, their own wickedness overtakes them. Their eyes are darkened, and they cannot escape.
David cries out for deliverance from those who intentionally seek to harm him. He acknowledges that evil exists, that there are people driven by envy, hatred, or selfish interests, but affirms his faith in God's intervention. This verse teaches us that even in the midst of unjust persecution, we can remain steadfast, knowing that the Lord is our strength and that no oppression escapes His watchful eye. The psalmist shows us that asking for divine protection is not a sign of weakness, but of courage and wisdom. He trusts in a God who is just and powerful, who not only observes injustice but acts decisively to preserve the life, integrity, and purposes of those who love Him. David's prayer is a model of total surrender, recognizing the dangers while simultaneously resting in the security of divine care. This verse also challenges us to examine how we react to adversaries or oppressive situations in our lives. We often try to face enemies with our own strength or allow ourselves to be consumed by fear, but David reminds us that true protection comes from God. When we place our trust in Him, we receive not only deliverance but also inner peace, courage to persevere, and the certainty that divine justice will prevail. To reflect, do I trust that God will repay justice to those who do evil? Do I have the patience to wait for Him to act in His own time? Do I recognize that I do not need to repay injustice with injustice?
Verse 11. For you are my protection, you preserve my life, you are my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer.
David reaffirms with conviction that his absolute security is in God. He does not depend on human strategies or external forces. He recognizes that only the Lord is capable of protecting his life in every aspect, physical, emotional, and spiritual. This declaration reveals a confidence that is unshaken by threats or adverse circumstances, for it is anchored in the One who is eternal, faithful, and just. The psalmist uses 4 powerful titles for God: protection, rock, fortress, and deliverer. Each of these terms reflects a dimension of divine care: the protection that guards against attacks, the rock that sustains even in the midst of the storm, the fortress that offers refuge and security, and the deliverer who breaks every kind of oppression. This multiplicity of images shows that no danger is greater than God's strength, and no situation is beyond His reach. This verse challenges us to recognize where we have sought safety and refuge. We often rely on material possessions, status, abilities, or human relationships to protect us, but David reminds us that true shelter is the Lord. Trusting in Him does not mean the absence of difficulties, but the certainty that, regardless of the challenges, our lives are in the hands of a God who never fails. To reflect, do I recognize God as my rock and refuge? Does my daily life reflect complete trust in Him? Do I seek deliverance and strength only in God or also in my own strength?
Verse 12. Do not give my soul over to the desires of my enemies. Preserve me from those who surround me with evil.
David here expresses an intense cry for the preservation of his soul from the evil and perverse intentions of those around him. He asks not only for physical protection, but also for spiritual and emotional protection, recognizing that the true threat to the righteous lies not only in external actions, but in the hidden desires and plans of those who seek to harm. This verse reveals David's awareness that his soul is precious in the eyes of God and that only He can protect it completely. The psalmist teaches us that divine vigilance is essential to maintaining the integrity of heart and mind. We are constantly surrounded by influences that seek to corrupt our thoughts, generate fear, or lead us away from faith. David shows that, even surrounded by human malice, we can remain steadfast when we trust in the sovereign intervention of God, who knows our every intention and our hearts better than we do. This verse invites us to reflect on where we have allowed negative influences to penetrate our lives. God's protection does not eliminate challenges, but it gives us discernment, inner strength, and emotional stability to avoid giving in to the enemy's traps. Trusting in Him means surrendering our weaknesses, anxieties, and fears, knowing that He is able to guard our souls with justice, love, and faithfulness. To reflect, do I trust that God protects me from the evil influences and intentions of others? Am I aware of the traps that try to undermine my faith? Do I allow God to strengthen my heart to face evil?
Verse 13. Arise, O Lord, face them. Break the arm of the wicked and protect me.
David here calls for God's direct action against those who practice injustice and persecute the righteous. He recognizes that human strength is limited and that only the Lord's sovereign power can crush evil and guarantee complete protection. This verse reveals a faith that is not limited to passive requests. It is an active faith, one that dares to ask for divine intervention to restore justice and preserve the lives of the innocent. The psalmist teaches us that there is no shame in asking God to fight for us. Recognizing our own limitations in the face of evil is also recognizing the greatness of God's power. By raising his voice, David demonstrates courage and total dependence, trusting that divine justice is infallible and that the wicked, no matter how powerful they seem, will not escape his sovereign hand. This verse invites us to reflect on our own struggles. How often do we try to face injustice alone, without resorting to divine intervention? Trusting in God doesn't mean passivity, but surrendering our fears and having the courage to ask Him to act on our behalf. Surrendering our struggles to the Lord brings us security, peace, and the certainty that our lives are protected by the One who is just and faithful. To reflect, do I have the courage to ask God to fight my battles? Do I trust that He is just and powerful enough to intervene? Do I understand that my responsibility is to remain faithful while He acts?
Verse 14. With your hand remove their wickedness. Their hearts are filled with evil and pride.
David recognizes that the wickedness of the wicked is not merely external, but springs from the heart, rooted in pride, selfishness, and corruption. He knows that without divine intervention, these wicked intentions cannot be fully contained or corrected. Therefore, he calls upon God's mighty hand, asking Him to act to ward off evil and protect the righteous, demonstrating that true justice does not depend on limited human efforts. This verse teaches us that profound injustice can only be confronted with the Lord's intervention. David invites us not to conform to the evil that surrounds us, but to trust fully in divine action, knowing that God sees the heart and hidden intentions of each person. Human justice is flawed, but God's is perfect, complete, and infallible. Trusting God in the face of others' evil is an exercise in faith and patience. It means maintaining integrity even when the unjust seem to triumph, and believing that pride and wickedness will not go unchallenged. It is a call to remain steadfast, trusting that God's protection and justice are sufficient to sustain and preserve us. To reflect, do I recognize that evil cannot be overcome by my efforts alone? Am I aware of the need for divine intervention in unjust situations? Do I trust in God's justice even when it is not immediate?
Verse 15. As for me, I will see your face in righteousness. When I awake, I will be satisfied with your presence.
David concludes this psalm with an expression of complete faith and hope. He demonstrates absolute confidence that God's justice will be revealed and that, by contemplating the Lord's face, he will find complete and true satisfaction. This verse reflects the joy of the righteous, which does not depend on external circumstances but on intimacy with God, recognizing that the divine presence is the source of all fulfillment and contentment. Here we see that the true reward of faithfulness is not merely temporary protection or deliverance, but the experience of profound communion with the Creator. Waking up in God's presence in righteousness is a state of spiritual fulfillment, where every anxiety is transformed into peace, every pain is consoled, and every expectation is met with the perfection of divine love. This verse also teaches us that a full life is linked to an eternal perspective. Even in the face of adversity or daily challenges, the heart of the righteous remains steadfast because they know that God's presence will be their greatest satisfaction. Trusting in God and anticipating the joy of beholding His face strengthens us, allows us to walk with courage, integrity, and unshakable faith, and reminds us that the life of the righteous ends in perpetual joy and complete fulfillment before the Lord. To reflect, is my greatest joy in God's presence or in fleeting circumstances? Do I live with the expectation of experiencing fulfillment in His presence? Do I trust that waking up with God is the true satisfaction of the soul? We can conclude that Psalm 17 teaches us to radically trust in God even in the face of injustice and persecution. It shows us that integrity and sincerity before the Lord bring security, protection, and deep communion with Him. It challenges us to keep our hearts pure, our words coherent, and our actions aligned with God's will, even when society values the opposite. Faithfulness to God is the path to experiencing true peace and fulfillment. May this psalm be an invitation to examine our own lives, to renounce unjust practices, to choose friendships that strengthen us spiritually, and to trust fully in divine intervention. Only then will we find lasting security, joy, and hope. If you've ever wondered who will truly find protection and security in the midst of adversity, who will remain steadfast even in the face of persecution and injustice, this psalm is for you. If you believe that integrity, justice, and sincerity have eternal value before God, and that living righteously is a choice that brings you closer to the sacred, this psalm is for you. If you know the challenge of keeping your heart pure in a world full of deceit, of walking steadfastly even when many follow crooked paths, Psalm 17 was written to remind you. God honors those who live with integrity, who speak truthfully, and who seek refuge and protection in Him without becoming corrupt. Now that we understand the meaning of each verse and the message God wants to deliver to us, I invite you to pray Psalm 17 for 6 more days. Read each verse as a deep conversation with the Creator and allow Him to strengthen in you the desire to live a practical faith, visible in your actions, in the commitments you keep, and in your love for others, trusting that He is our protector and deliverer at all times. And to seal this message in our hearts, we now invite you to pray and keep with you this special prayer inspired by Psalm 17. Return to it whenever you want to remember that God's presence is real in the lives of those who walk with integrity, who do not waver even in the face of persecution, and who make righteousness a lifestyle before the Lord.
Prayer inspired by Psalm 17. Almighty God, Lord of justice and truth, thank you for revealing to us through Psalm 17 the depth of trust we can place in you, even in the face of the injustices and persecutions that surround us. Help us to walk with integrity and transparency, to speak with sincerity and act with righteousness, knowing that you search each person's heart and know our innermost intentions. May we learn to depend entirely on you, recognizing that true protection and refuge come not from men, but from your constant presence, which sustains and strengthens us at every step. Lord, strengthen our faith so that we may stand firm even in the midst of adversity, persevering in patience and hope, without straying from your ways. Protect us from enemies both visible and invisible, from those who seek to lead us astray through malice, deceit, or pride. Loving Father, may our lives be a living testimony of your love, your faithfulness, and your justice, so that those around us may see your light and be inspired to seek your presence. May the hope of beholding your face motivate us to live with integrity, faithfulness, and dedication to you, and may each challenge we face become an opportunity to trust even more in your care and providence. In the name of Jesus, amen.
If this message spoke to your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that, in days when the world seems full of injustice and persecution, God still calls His children to live with integrity and trust in Him. May we together rediscover the beauty of a life pleasing to the Lord, built on truth, justice, and faithfulness to the Creator. Subscribe to the channel for more reflections on the Psalms. Turn on notifications to receive each new study and leave your prayer request in the comments. We will intercede for you with faith and affection. May the Lord renew in you the desire to walk in righteousness, strengthen your faith in the face of adversity and persecution, and remind you, every day, that those who trust in the Lord are like a mountain. They do not shake, they remain firm and find security in the presence of God, just as Psalm 17 teaches us. Until the next video, may God bless your life, your family, and your business.